Well, hello and welcome to this week's episode of Real Hope Conversations. I'm your host, Abby McFarlane, and I am so excited that you are here this week because we are diving into an amazing series looking at Nehemiah. He is a character in the Bible that I myself haven't really looked at, and so I'm really excited to be learning and understanding more about Nehemiah's life and how that can apply to us. And to help us navigate through Nehemiah's life is Kath and Phil Henry. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm always excited when I'm sitting down and chatting to you guys because I feel so much wisdom, but also that I learn so much about God just through chatting to you. So I know that everybody who's listening or watching this will also learn so much. So thank you so much for being here.
It's a pleasure.
Absolutely.
So Nehemiah is a character in the Bible that I think a lot of people maybe gloss over or don't really dive deeply into him and the role that he plays in the Bible. Can you just share a little bit about him for those people who maybe haven't read the devotionals just yet?
Well, you find out about Nehemiah and hear that he's one of the people who've been exiled. And he's been able to get this great job with the king. So he's kind of comfy in his new life. But then he hears that the people of God are returning to Jerusalem. They've been given that permission. And so he's in this really interesting place where he's now hearing about that experience of them returning.
Yeah.
And I think being challenged to go, wow, these are my people, and what's happening for them really matters to me. So it's his brother who comes and challenges him, actually. And that's the opening part of Nehemiah. That's what we hear about him, that he's this guy who really loves God, who's been in exile, has kind of found this comfy life still privately, worshipping God, but serving the king of the time. And then he hears from his brother that his people, the people who love God returning to Jerusalem, have discovered the city is pretty much wrecked and they're not safe.
I loved that you guys titled this Building Community. And I think it's something that, I don't know, when we're talking about building communities of faith, I don't think that people naturally go, oh, well, let's look at Nehemiah to talk about that, right? Because it's predominantly about rebuilding the wall in Jerusalem. So how do we get from rebuilding the wall of Jerusalem to rebuilding community? What does his life and this story in the Bible show us about rebuilding communities?
Well, it's interesting because I think a lot of people use Nehemiah as a book on leadership because he does take leadership. But what you notice is that for him, in a way, as a leader, his heart is drawn to people. And so his desire in what's happening and his speaking to the king and then moving back to Jerusalem is to actually rebuild a community, rebuild this people, provide a place of safety, and to restore them in a way as a nation in their homeland again. And so that's something that maybe isn't mentioned as much, but it's very obvious when you begin to look at it from that perspective.
Yeah. I think what I love about Nehemiah as well is that he has this heart that just oozes for people.
Yeah.
And when his brother comes and tells him about the city, he weeps and he cries over the devastation that his people have walked into and the fact that they're not safe. Like, that is a man that is so connected to who he is and who his people are, that he would weep over that and feel such empathy, but such that would be the driver for him in what he's next to do.
Yeah.
So you mentioned in the devotionals that he is similar to Esther, which I thought was, again, such a fascinating thing to think about, because everybody knows about Esther.
Yes.
But he was similar to Esther. Can you just unpack that a little bit more?
I see that because when I read Esther, I think here was this woman who was in a position where she had access to resources that the people of God didn't. A resource for people to be safe. And And Nehemiah had access to the king in a way knowing that he would be able to release resources. So the people were so discouraged because they went and the wall was broken. The idea of rebuilding their community seemed hopeless. And I think we're in a place now where people are gradually coming back to meeting together, to forming together, but seeing things aren't right, and all over the world it seems like community and what is needed to help communities happen and build safely, the resources aren't there. And I think it's a reminder that God will find a way if we're willing to go to him. He'll give us a way to find those resources to help other people. That's what happened for Esther. That's what happened for Nehemiah. So they didn't have it personally, but they had an opportunity to go to God and say, identify with the people, weep, repent collectively, and then to have the courage to trust that God was taking them to this place of asking for help. And I think that's pretty amazing.
I think you've touched on something that I think really applies to so many people that are probably listening and watching this, that who've just come out of a season in the world where communities were broken down, where relationships and connections were so distanced that they were through screens, not through physical conversation, and communities looked different. And even on the flip side, they now still look different. They aren't what they were before. And I think that you're right, that there is a rebuilding happening, but it will look different on the flip side. For you both have built church communities. You've both been a part of planting churches. How, for those people who are watching who are probably navigating this season of rebuilding and what that looks like, for you guys, how has Nehemiah's life and this story helped inform your approach to building communities and planting churches and inspiring those who are doing that? Because that's a large part of your work.
Yeah, it's, one of the beautiful things that I discovered in Nehemiah when I felt like God really prompted me to read it in this different light, not as looking for leadership skills, but looking at what does it mean to inspire people to community again when things aren't what you thought they would be, or when you have to reassess. And he went and he reassessed and looked at the walls and went, where are they broken? Where is it not working? But then he inspired the people to come out of their homes and to look at what was in front of them, which was the wall in front of their doorway. And then in chapter 3 it talks about men, women and children coming out and working shoulder to shoulder with the priests. So the priests got to rebuild the gates. And so they were all standing shoulder to shoulder, working together, but on the bit that they saw every day as they came out their door.
Wow.
And I felt like God was saying, let's be inspired to do the bit that we can do, because sometimes it's overwhelming. If you just kind of say, okay, communities are broken, it doesn't leave much hope. But if you say, you know what, in your family, in your church community, what do you see, what comes to mind each morning? Just one thing that you could do. What's one word of encouragement that you could give to someone? What's one word, because that's the building for us, isn't it? What's one place that you could meet with one person and just take that moment to stop and say hello? I mean, a classic is, this morning I saw someone from church as I went to the shops. She was sitting down on a chair, and I was just like, oh my gosh, Anne, hi. I haven't seen her for ages, but I got to sit and have a brief conversation. We encouraged each other in our faith and in life, and then we went again. And so I just think, those moments, taking those moments that we can, that are intentionally going, okay, this might be a God moment to encourage someone, and it could build that relational community again.
And even things like just, I think, like inviting people home for lunch. Because I think as people have beginning to come back to church, they're realising, even though they saw each other online and they heard messages, there's something very special about face-to-face connection.
Yeah.
And I think we all miss it. And so, and it's true. I think, you know, sometimes we think, oh, well, it's up to the leadership of the church to build community. Well, yes and no. You know, it's all of us. And so it's just inviting somebody home for lunch from church and saying, hey, let's catch up. We haven't. So I think there are a whole lot of practical things, like Kath said, where we can just do what's right in front of us. And it then empowers everybody. But I think a lot of churches are working on that, trying to go, how do we rebuild community in this new place? So there are some practical things to do.
Phil, in one of the studies that you wrote, you spoke about Nehemiah's first response. When in the whole process, from the moment that he heard that the walls and Jerusalem was broken to his interaction with the king through to the actual rebuilding. And you spoke about his first response being prayer. And I thought about my own life and I went, my first response is not prayer. But that's an encouragement for us. Can you walk through that a little bit more and what we can learn from Nehemiah and his first response?
Yeah, well, you know, I think one of the things that God often asks us is, do you trust me?
Yeah.
And, you know, wherever we are, no matter whether we're a young Christian or a Christian who has been, you know, journeying with God for years and years and years, I think the question remains is that, do I trust God?
Yeah.
And the trusting of God is actually believing that he has the resources, like what Kath said. For both Esther as well as Nehemiah, they realised they needed more than what they had, and so they did this big trust thing of going, all right, I don't have what I need, I'm going to ask the person who does. And so they went to the kings in faith, not knowing the outcome.
Yeah.
And in a way that was prayer. I mean, both of them asked, you need to pray for me because I'm going to the king. And so it's the same thing, I think, for us. It's like realising, you know what, God has the resources of heaven.
Yeah.
And our journey of faith is a journey of trusting God. And it's funny because sometimes I think we grow up believing to be mature is to be self-reliant.
Yeah.
And yet I think God has set this thing up so that there are often times that we actually can't be self-reliant. We are in need. We don't have the resources. And it's so that God can provide.
Yeah.
And he wants to. It's like a dad who just wants to give. We have a God who just wants to give, to bless us and to remind us that he's there for us. And so we go to him.
Yeah.
We pray, we ask, we believe, and then see what he brings. And often it will be far more than what we could ever bring.
Yeah.
And I mean, Kath and I are both doers, maybe like you.
Very much a doer.
And so it is an easy default to say, all right, I'm going to make this thing happen and knuckle down. But then, you know, often we're put in situations where we just don't have enough, regardless of how capable we think we are.
Yeah.
And so it's a good discipline for us to learn, just to keep going to God and say, God, I need you for this moment.
Yeah.
Even if I feel like I've got something, I need you more.
Yeah.
So,
As you were speaking, I not the penny dropped, but I was like, Nehemiah was going in front of the king, and if it went badly, it could go badly.
yeah.
Really badly for him.
Really badly for him.
Yeah.
Similar to Esther.
Yeah, both.
Like, they both essentially were walking in not knowing if they were going to have a life when they walked back out again, let alone the
Absolutely.
resources to
Yes.
do what they needed to do. So the faith that he had was a courageous faith,
Yeah.
because he stepped into a situation not knowing what was going to happen, not
Yes.
knowing the outcome, but trusting that God was going to work through that.
Yeah.
And I think about my own faith. I want a courageous faith that's going to step into situations not knowing the outcome, not knowing what I'm going to walk out with at the end, but knowing that God is in control. How do we cultivate a courageous faith like that.
Ask big prayers.
Yes.
And be willing to, there was something about Nehemiah, wasn't there, that when he wept, when he heard, so he heard the challenge.
Yeah.
He actually let his brother's words impact him.
Yeah.
Because he wept because he was impacted by that.
Mm.
And then there must have been something within him that was willing to give up the comforts he had. That's what I think. I think that must have already been there.
Yeah.
So he'd already decided that this life he had was something that wasn't really his totally.
Yeah.
He was willing to give it up.
Mm.
He was willing to risk it all for something that looked more like God than comfort.
Wow.
And I think that's, for me, that's what I hear in it, and I think, wow, would I put God above my comfort? Would I put a collective kind of longing for community and the place God would have it in it above even my own private faith,
Yeah.
so that I could see God work in a way that I know is on his heart. I
Yeah.
know God's heart is for community. I know that really deeply.
Yeah.
So would I be willing to risk it all to trust him that this is still his way?
Yeah.
And I think that's part of us for now. Like, you know, God gave us this understanding of throughout the Bible, it's about community. It's not about one person, it's about people.
Yeah.
And it's about God's people. And so I think that's always been his plan A. Doesn't seem like he's got a plan B.
Yeah.
So would I be willing to keep giving myself to God's plan A?
Yeah. Yeah. So back to the community part, because we've flown all over the place. So the community is working together side by side on the part that is in front of them, on the part of the wall that is in front of them. But Nehemiah didn't go in to this thinking sunshine, lollipops and rainbows. This is going to be amazing. He didn't go into it blindly. He went into it knowing that there would be opposition, and he was prepared for that opposition. Can you unpack that a little bit?
I find it really interesting that they get about halfway on the wall and things are looking pretty good, and then people start opposing them. And I just think that's the way of life.
Yeah.
I don't think you build community, you work with people, and you think, okay, well, this is just going to be a walk in the park for all of us. I think anyone who's been in a family situation, who's been in a church situation, who's been in a work situation, knows that there's conflict arises.
Yeah.
And not everyone wants things to go well. And sometimes it's the people who really should have been the ones who were providing more help who then kind of have feelings and go, actually, I don't want this to go well because this will make me look bad. And so there's a little bit of that goes on, and you go, oh gosh, human beings, we're humans, all of us. Glory.
So isn't that the excuse for human beings? Mankind.
Mankind.
I mean, I don't know. Like it doesn't. Like when you read the passage, it wasn't like he said, I know I'm going to get opposition, but it just seemed to be there.
Yeah.
And he didn't pretend. He wasn't, oh my goodness, we're not going to be able to finish the wall, all that sort of thing. He just chose to go, okay, let's address it.
Yeah.
And I think that's really bold of him, because sometimes, like in our situations, we get frightened of conflict and we pull way back and we don't want to have the tough conversation. But he just chose to go, guys, yes, we're going to have opposition, and he made plans for it, and yet keep saying, let's keep going, but let's also, like, remember how they said they worked with sort of a shovel in one hand and a sword in the other, and so they were ready for it, and so it was just a little bit like, okay, it may come, let's just be prepared, let's not miss preparing and not having hard conversations.
Yeah.
And so that was bold, that was gutsy in my book as well.
Yeah.
But he also kept the main thing the main thing.
I
So
think
he didn't
that's
give
it
up.
too. Yeah.
So sometimes we give up on building community and we get so sidetracked into the other conflicted situations that we forget that what God really called us to, what he resourced us for, was this. So let's continue with this while we prepare to say, okay, yeah, that's a problem, let's talk about it. But there were also things that he had to deal with where people had to go back and work in their fields, they weren't having enough food, the people who were meant to be helping them with that weren't.
Yeah.
And so it's being aware that, in a sense, this was creating a safe place for community to happen.
Yeah.
But you can create the safe place, and then there are also other things about living together in community that need to be dealt with. So he was recognising that, and he seemed to understand that and know that that would also need to be done.
Yeah.
So he heard about the needs and responded.
Mm.
Yeah.
And I think that's important.
I think it is too. I think the other thing is best laid plans, right?
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
Best laid plans,
Yeah.
but things happen.
Yeah.
Yep.
And people, like we said, people happen.
Yeah.
And people are all coming, communities are filled with people that have all different backgrounds and different histories and different
Totally.
experiences. And so they're bringing that all into community, and if you're not prepared to work through that with people,
Yeah.
like that's what community is about journeying together through all
Yeah.
the highs and the lows,
Mm.
not just the good times
Yeah.
Yeah.
that do inevitably come.
Mm. Mm.
Which leads me to celebrating together.
Yes. Yeah.
So the wall gets built,
Yeah.
and then they celebrate together.
Yes.
And it's an important part of the process.
Mm.
You guys touch on it and say that this is a really important part of the process as community.
Yeah.
Can you share a bit more about that?
Mm. I think it was super interesting when they chose to celebrate, because actually they discovered the Word of God, and Ezra comes out and reads it, and they're super convicted.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
they don't want to celebrate, because they then suddenly realise, oh my gosh, we've got so much wrong, and we haven't been the people that God really wanted us to be for all this time and even now. But then they realise, they stop and Nehemiah says, you know what? That is important, but it's also important, even before everything's complete, for us to celebrate what is.
Yeah.
And I think that's really good. I would say it's important to, when we can look to the future and see there's still so much yet to be done, when something's been achieved, to stop and truly celebrate that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what they did.
Mm.
They went back to their homes and they feasted and they celebrated, and they had community.
Yeah.
That's what the celebration was. This was the first time that they had really done a community event and all celebrated with a big feast. So I think, for me, that says we don't have to have it all perfect.
Yeah.
And
Or finished either.
or finished.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And what was beautiful was that as they celebrated, it wasn't they built the wall.
Yeah.
It was we built the
Yeah.
wall. There's something huge about a community doing something together
Yeah.
and getting a result.
Yeah.
And it serves as a memory. Like it's in scripture.
Yeah.
Like for us, it's a memory that we go, wow, look what we did. Look
Yeah.
what a community can do. And we can celebrate that. And I think that's the beautiful thing. I mean, God intently chose to say, I'm going to do this thing through people, not just come in and go boom.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You
And he
know?
does that consistently throughout the Bible, right? He
Yeah.
can come in and he can go bang,
Yeah.
Yeah.
but he chooses to do it through people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Jesus chose the 12.
Yeah.
And then they chose more and more people because the kingdom advances by people, not just God going, boom.
Yeah. Yeah. Us
So-
working together.
Yeah. It's fantastic.
Yeah. And a common purpose, I think that's also the thread that you guys really pull in through these devotionals, is that they're coming together for a common purpose.
Yes.
They're united
Yeah.
around that.
Mm.
And so for us, as Christians who are journeying together, it's coming together around that common purpose
Mm.
of sharing God's love with as many people as possible, but
Yeah.
knowing and understanding him and his character and who he calls us to be
Yeah.
in this world that is so broken. We're not alone in that.
Yeah.
We're doing it together.
Mm.
So, Kath and Phil, there are a stack of people who are watching this or listening to this who have read the devotionals and who are probably in situations where maybe they are rebuilding community, facing opposition in community at various stages of the Nehemiah journey.
Yes.
What would you say to them to encourage them in these seasons?
Weep and pray. I really would.
Yeah.
I'd say it's okay to feel sad. Sometimes we don't actually give ourselves permission to feel sad. So weep and pray and trust and celebrate when you can see God moving, and encourage other people to celebrate with you. That's what I would say.
Yeah. Phil?
And I think is small steps.
Yeah.
Sometimes, like we've sort of spoken about, we can look at a situation and feel overwhelmed.
Yeah.
And it's like, just each day choose a small step. Or each
Yeah.
week choose a small step. Who could I have lunch with? Who could I do something to bless? And I think that's,
Yeah.
then you just see things change.
Yeah.
And so you ask yourself, what small thing could I do to help build a community, to bless and to build a place of safety
Yeah.
for the people around?
I love that, because I think it's so easy for us to be overwhelmed and to switch off.
Yeah, and do nothing.
And do nothing.
Yeah, yeah,
But that one small thing
yeah.
actually plants seeds that grow and starts to build momentum
Yeah,
when you're building community.
yes.
So, friend, be encouraged. Number one, you are not alone. We are all in this together, building a community of Christ around the world, and we are journeying together. But can I encourage you today to think about one small thing that you could do this week that would encourage somebody and help to build the community of Christ around you? I hope that you have been encouraged by this conversation and by the life of Nehemiah. Well, this moment in his life, which is so significant, and by the rebuilding of the wall in Jerusalem. It's more than just a rebuilding of a wall, it's a rebuilding of community. And as you're journeying through this week, I hope that you continue to meditate and ponder upon maybe the questions that have arisen for you as you've listened to us chatting. If you have questions, you can go into the link in the show notes. It'll take you directly to a website where you can get in contact with the Real Hope team. We would love to be journeying with you and answering questions as you continue to understand God through this story and through these devotional series. Also, never forget that Real Hope is all about us journeying together to know and understand God and to be experiences of His love out there in the world. So if there are people in your life that you would love to have a conversation with about building community, because we're doing it together, right? Why not share this conversation, share this video with your friends and family, and have a conversation about how you collectively together could build community. I'm really looking forward to seeing you here next week for the next conversation on the Real Hope Conversations podcast. We love having you here, and we look forward to continuing to journey together. See you next week.